Hey, I'm Johnny Drive-By. Why don't you turn your dial to the Atheist Edge?
All right, let's get it started. It is impossible for fresh water and seawater to mix. And he it is who have given independence to the two seas, though they meet, one palatable, sweet, and the other saltish, bitter, and have set a barrier and a forbidden band between them. Okay, I mix salt water and fresh water together all the time. I do it because I got like this basement where I just go down into the basement and mix salt water and fresh water all the time. It's kind of like my thing. And I just, it's a very delicate process. I just take some fresh water and I take some salt water. And this is a very important part. You got to pour them in there at the same time. Make sure it's at the same time. Make sure they're around the same temperature, kind of like room temperature. It works that way. And then you can take a spoon or a fork, anything, and you just stir it up. Just stir it up and it'll mix. I promise you. And then you could drink it. I mean, the salt water, it wouldn't be too good for you, but hopefully some of that, fresh water will kind of help out with that. But that's what I got to say on this chapter. So, peace.
Trees are more important than humans. When thou shalt besiege a city for a long time in making war against it to take it, thou shalt destroy not the trees thereof by forcing an axe against them, for thou mayest eat of them, and thou shalt not cut them down. For the tree of the field is man's life, to employ them in the siege. And that's it's Deuteronomy 20:19.
And what guy doesn't like sporting wood?
Yeah, I don't think, going back and looking at this is not because trees are more important than humans. It's because you need the trees to survive on while you're slitting the throats of your brothers, which is still messed up in its own right.
An open letter to Nobel Peace Prize winner Malala Yousafzai. Dear Malala, your story of resilience and courage is an inspiration to us all. As a champion of human rights and education, I can say with confidence the world is a much better place with you in it. But when you said, the more you speak about Islam and against all Muslims, the more terrorists we create. You must have forgotten that we have a little thing over here in the United States called the First Amendment. We don't care much for attempts to silence us. Furthermore, your very statement proves that Islam is not a religion of peace. It just increases their resolve to destroy us? Fine, they can bring that weak shit. Core Muslim dogma is hatred of Jews, Christianity, and non-believers. So forgive me when I say I don't give a fuck if your words offend them. All the best. Malala is the now world-famous Pakistani spokesperson for education for Muslim girls. She is also the youngest recipient of the Nobel Peace Prize. At age 15, Malala was shot in the head by a member of the Pakistani Taliban for attempting to get an education and encouraging other Pakistani girls to do as well. Amazingly, she survived and at age 17 set out to attempt to secure the rights of Pakistani and, by extension, other predominantly Muslim countries' girls' population. Perhaps Malala can be forgiven for this encroachment on basic human rights, that is, trying to squelch the freedom of speech, considering her relative youth, inexperience, and lack of elder wisdom. Perhaps she speaks out of fear. She narrowly survived one attack from outraged devout members of her own religion. Maybe she was just saying, I'd really rather not get shot again. Of course, since the attack become a highly visible and world-famous symbol for educating Muslim females, I guess if avoiding future personal attacks from her own fellow Muslims were the genuine aim, by her own argument, she's kind of bringing it on herself. One wonders why, with her desire to free girls for an education, she doesn't see the irony in protecting the very ideology that tried to kill her to prevent it. A good quote is, It was much easier to explain the veil than to answer questions about the wounds. By Pawan Mishra, Coinman, An Untold Conspiracy.
Yahweh cannot be a God of both perfect mercy and perfect justice. A perfectly just and perfectly merciful God is a logical impossibility because any mercy God extends to an individual means he has suspended the justice on that same individual. A perfectly merciful God would absolve everybody for any crime. However, a perfectly just God consistently passed down appropriate sentences. Or, as Stephen Tiger put it in his book Doctrine Impossible, pages 190 to 191, depicting God as the avenger of injustice like a comic book superhero does not honor him, it belittles him. Defining justice in terms of God administering cosmic comeuppance illustrates the blasphemy of construing God as avenger. Believers who think that hell must be real because punishment for evildoers must involve pain and suffering should ask themselves whether an eternal torture chamber is a godly concept or a sick human fantasy. Theists ask, if there is no promise of heaven as reward for goodness and no threat of hell as punishment for evil, what stops anyone from doing bad things? What stops ethical atheists from doing bad things? Their sense of right and wrong. They are guided by reason and moral mindfulness in earthly life rather than by religion-fueled hopes of fears about an afterlife. Believers and atheists alike may act for good or evil, and there is no clear correlation between belief in God and goodness of actions. Note that the question itself links salvation to good works and damnation to evil works, which contradicts the doctrine of salvation by faith and turns religion into a tool for controlling people's actions. And that makes the truth of church doctrine irrelevant.
According to the Quran, you can only have 4 wives, but you are allowed to have as many sex slaves as you want.
Why? Because it's a man-made book, and that's what
Right.
men wanted.
It is total patriarchy.
And in this case,
No
when I say
question.
man-made, I'm talking about humans with a penis, not just mankind generally.
Right.
Of course, they would
You
make
think-
rules that are what they want.
And you think about it, right? As a means of social control, it's an extraordinary way to ensure compliance with whatever it is that the leader wants. The leader's the one. You do the math, right? If prominent men get multiple wives, then that means that 3/4 of the male population gets nothing. And then you take that population and you force them to comply with your dictate, and you let them have a wife. It's an extraordinarily well thought out method of controlling behavior, and it's obvious for what it is.
Well, and it's
another
also
quote?
just the misogyny that's inherent in
Right.
most Western culture. You know, it's not until the last 100 years or so that women were seen as anything other than the property of their father and then the property of their husband.
Right.
And could not themselves own property.
Yeah. A decade ago in Saudi Arabia, women couldn't even drive cars. I think that's
There
true.
are also, I mean, that may be the official law, but there's also plenty who are ready to kill them for doing it.
Right.
Dead birds can fly. This comes to us from the Quran, Surah 2. And I'll read the particular verse here. This is verse 260. This is from the Yusuf Ali translation from the Arabic into English. Behold, Abraham said, My Lord, how thou givest life to the dead. He said, Dost thou not then believe? He said, Yea, but to satisfy my own understanding. He said, Take 4 birds, tame them to turn to thee, put a portion of them on every hill and call to them. They will come to thee, flying with speed. Then know that God is exalted in power, wise. So, this is, yeah, okay. It is what Jim has characterized here. That dead birds can, well, it's not just the dead birds can fly. It's the dead birds can be actually reconstituted. So presumably the test here the test of Abraham's faith that is imagined. This doesn't, as far as I know, this doesn't come from any Hebrew tradition of Yahweh or Allah, whatever, saying to Abraham, if you want to test your faith in me, I'll bring these dead birds back to life, and that will prove that I am the Lord your God, Yahweh, whatever. I am that I am. There is a bird thing that exists in of course the Noah story, right? Right at the end of the flood, as the waters are receding, Noah sends out a raven, then he sends out a dove, and the dove eventually comes back with an olive branch, and that's a sign that Yahweh has been faithful and has restored the earth after the flood and murdering every single living thing except the ocean-going animals. At any rate, so this presumably is just a straight-up test of faithfulness. It's a test that Abraham is asked to do for Allah, which is kind of a reversal of the big test of faith of Abraham that we have in the Old Testament in Genesis, where Yahweh tells him to sacrifice his son Isaac. Now, I don't know whether one of these stories, presumably the dead bird story, is a kind of a garbled reinterpretation or new version of the old one. In the Abraham and Isaac story, Isaac doesn't actually get killed, so there's no bringing anything back to life. Although there is mention of, there are some references to Abraham believing that even if he had killed Isaac, then Yahweh could have brought him back to life, and so it wasn't actually really a true test, because if Yahweh is Yahweh, then who cares if you kill your son, if Yahweh can just poof, bring him back to life. As we see later, that sort of a sacrifice is kind of meaningless if you can just pop back to life, right? At any rate, but that's sort of beside the point. This is merely just a demonstration of power, I think. And so Abraham, for whatever reason, is asking for clarification over the power of life over death that is held by Allah. And Allah says, look, take 4 birds, tame them, train them, then cut them up, scatter them on the hills, and I will poof them back to life and have them fly right back to you. Yeah, that's what it says.
Truth claims spoken in public are necessarily open to critical review. Truth claims of a religious nature are not immune. You're free to believe anything you want in private, but if you make your claim in public, expect it to get put under a microscope, challenged, and maybe even ridiculed if it is found wanting. If someone makes a historical truth claim, like, say, Christopher Columbus was the first person in the New World, you would be justified in expressing your skepticism and mockery. Religious claims are no different. You make any kind of claim, whether it's religious, even pseudoscientific, you best be ready for someone to jump down your throat if they know better. Right? You have to be open to criticism. I don't care what it is you're talking about.
You should even be open and humble enough to receive it. Because I think one of the big issues we have in society right now is people are, especially with social media and people jumping down each other's throats, it's impossible to potentially be wrong. Like, it's so scary because you can just get torn to shreds. And so if we don't allow people to be wrong, and then we don't allow people the ability to change, there's no reason to share ideas. And then we get stuck in our echo chamber.
Yep. And one thing I've learned, the best thing about being proven wrong, you are no longer wrong.
Very nice.
That's good. Let me say also, we forget, the rise of the internet in the 90s. We forget how it changed the game, right? Prior to the internet, religious people were way more apt to clutch their pearls and, that offended me. You can't speak to me like that. You can't challenge my worldview. You can't blaspheme the Lord, even if you don't believe
I
it.
can.
But the internet just came along and just bulldozed the shit out of that. And we're seeing it again now in the developing world, especially in parts of Africa, where they're just now getting the, well, maybe not just now, but within the last few years, they've getting more and more countries are getting the internet. And you're seeing this, in these forums on social media. You're seeing people from the developing nations first access to the internet, and you're seeing how freaked out they get in an atheist Facebook group, for instance.
Yeah, and there's a difference that you have to explain to religious people that science doesn't have authorities, it has experts. And it's a huge shift in the thinking of, you can have a religious authority that seems, claims to be infallible, but you have experts who know things about the world, but don't claim to be an infallible authority. And if they make a claim, they have the data to back it up, and they expect people to fact check them and replicate what they have done to get the same result. And so it's a very, very different approach to what we are given by the scientific community versus what we're given by the religious community. And I think it's seen as the same thing by religious people. They see, especially lately, they see the scientific community as like, oh, why should we believe you? And it's like, well, you're not asked to believe it on faith. You're asked to learn about it and understand the evidence and trust that these institutions are fact checking and they have these checks and balances in place. So it's such a different way of seeing it than they're used to.
Well, science is a method.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'd go as far as to say there's experts. There are definitely masters in their disciplines. And I'm a chemist myself. So science is the best method we have, so far anyways, of figuring out reality for what it is. We do everything we can. We test things. We come up with hypotheses. We test them. We send those out to be tested by other people. That's the peer review process. And then we come to conclusions based on the evidence that we either have observed or can infer through the evidence that's there. And if something is wrong, we re-look at the evidence and change our consensus. That's just how it works.
Yeah. Right.
Science adjusts its views based on what's observed. Faith is the denial of observations so that belief can be preserved. If you show me that, say, homeopathy works, then I will change my mind. I will spin on a fucking dime.
When new evidence is introduced, it gets added to the hypothesis or the theorem or whatever.
That's good.
I love that.
That's good one.
We even have, I was going to say, I love how we even have, what is that?
Standard of evidence?
Margin of error.
The margin of error. That's what I'm thinking.
Margin of error. Yeah.
So we even have the margin of error to say this is how sure we are. This is how sure we reasonably can be.
Right. Yeah. It's never 100% because it leaves you open to error and noisy data, and it leaves you open to new information as well.
Mm-hmm.
Like these, the effectiveness of maybe these new vaccines coming out for the coronavirus. What do they say? 95% effective. There's a margin of error on the effectiveness of medicine. Anything sure. Except mathematics, I guess. There is no wiggle room in mathematics.
Maths is what it is. It's just if this has been said many times before, but if everything was wiped clean, new religions would pop up, but the math and science would still be the same.
Rewrite history, rewind us all the way back to the beginning, and we would still be believing in probably a need to fill the gap of our loneliness and our fear of death and dark and the unknown. But it would be completely different characters. But science, the number system, it might not be Arabic numerals, but it would still work the exact same way as it does now. That's right. The channel really grew, well, usually when Aaron Raw comes in, to be perfectly honest. Whenever he shows up, we go from 300 views per video to 90,000. And then there's a huge spike. And then not only are they watching that, they're going back and looking at the back catalog too, which, it's a win-win.